All right, so welcome everyone to this surplus challenge, which is really about how to take control of your money in 2026. I'm pleased to be joined here by Evan Lucas, who is one of the Moorr ambassadors and also best-selling author of his book, which is called Mind Over Money. And we also have hopefully Elric Wu on the line. Elric will be joining us. Elric is our product manager for our money management section of the Moorr platform. So welcome, Al. You're going to be joining us in about 10, 15 minutes time, taking us a deep dive into the demo to show people basically how to organize their finances in the Moorr platform. And I think it's also important to understand, we've got a little note down here from scattered spending to surplus control. And we do know in terms of a lot of the research that we've done that a lot of people underestimate just how much they spend, usually around by 20 to 30% in terms of their underspend. So we've got a lot to get through. So let's get started in terms of what that story looks like. Now, I wanted to start on this particular image here because I think it just brings home, because I've got a high level of confidence in terms of understanding what people think about their money and what it purposely aligns to. And what it aligns to is this underpinning of what your best lifestyle looks like. And so we obviously refer to this as lifestyle by design. And effectively, it's about planning for life's journey. But to be able to do that, you've got to juggle certain things. You've got to juggle your general living costs, and you've got to make decisions all around, the types of spending that you do from a general living point of view. You've then got to juggle that with the living for now, which is some of those lifestyle elements in terms of getting, work-life balance and some of those experiences and memories. But you also have a wealth building journey that's going on there. And we consider the forever home or the family home being part of that particular journey, in addition to obviously, if you know anything about us and through our Property Couch podcast and our services, we obviously do a lot of wealth creation through residential properties. But I think, if you anchor yourself on this lifetime journey story, and you can see all the important elements, so you see obviously the consistent element through there is that work element, which is the income generating element. But as you start thinking about through your education, getting, sound employment, moving through your housing and family program, finding your life partner, and then starting to think about wealth accumulation, and then some of the retirement planning that starts to happen for a lot of people in their late 30s, early 40s, and you start building out that nest egg. And then we get a little bit more time and freedom in our 50s and so forth before we hit their retirement in our 60s. And then ultimately we start thinking about contribution. That contribution can be towards our children and providing a financial, sort of starting board for them. And it could also potentially be in other ways in which you can deliver some of that wealth to the community benefit as well. And then you've obviously got the estate planning and some potential asset sell down, and then maybe for some of that supported living. So there is a lot in here. So what I'm saying to all aspiring people who are watching this is this anchors you, this underpins everything that you're talking about. So that's what I'm trying to make that connection, because you might have other reasons around feeling in control of your money and all those type of things, but this is the underlying foundation in terms of how you should think about why you're doing this. Because all aspiring Australians, if they manage their money correctly, trap that surplus and put themselves in a position where that money is working harder for them, then they're going to be on a pretty lovely journey that's going to bear fruit at the end of that journey as well.
Yeah, so my point into it is Ben keeps using the word journey, and I think that needs to be picked up as the underlying concept about where all financial planning, all financial management comes from.
Yeah.
Which is that you are basically living through time. And you, as we said on the open, in the Instagram posts, and what we've said many times on these before, is that you can't buy time, which is the classic quote from Warren Buffett and also from Charlie Munger. And what he means by that, you can't stop time. Right, so this chart shows you very clearly that you look at the distribution of your wealth in that mountain. That's what it is. It's the distribution of your wealth and the time through it. but you can gain time. And that's what they're alluding to here with that. If you have lifestyle by design, if you have that surplus, you can gain time. Ben talks about, meaningful employment. But if you then have surplus capital and surplus money and surplus investment, you can then start asking yourself questions. Do I need to keep working as hard as I have been?
Yeah.
Do I want to take that extended holiday? Can I take, for instance, some of those people that are starting getting their 50s now are looking at, do I take a sabbatical? The reason they can do that is because they have gained time by having the surpluses in place from when they were in their previous years.
That's right. Good money management is unavoidable
Yeah.
if you're trying to build future financial security for yourself and your loved ones. And I think that sets us up for tonight. But let's take a look at what we're going to cover, right? We're going to get into the meat and potatoes in terms of what's going to be happening. So part one is, what is surplus and why it does matter. So we'll move through that relatively quickly, but it's important to ground it in that understanding. Part two is the old way versus the smarter way. Part three is when we go into the demos, and that's when we can turn knowledge off the data into insights and then actionable insights off the back of that. So that's where we pick up in part four. And then finally, we land the plane with a lot of hopefully interaction with all of you around trying to get the best value out of putting all this together. So let's rip into it. What I wanted to talk to you about is why does it matter? Well, I mentioned it earlier around this 20 to 30% of households not understanding, where all their money goes. And I think that is important context because we can't manage what we can't see, and we can't control if we don't have a full picture of our story. So part of why we're sort of talking about why it's important starts off with this idea of surplus. So you saw a picture of all of those, sort of big rocks in the jar as we're going through life's journey. But to fuel all of those goals, we need to make sure, whether they're personal or financial outcomes, we need to trap surplus. So in other words, we need to form a way of being able to see as the income's coming in, that we're putting some of that income aside. And so, through this process, it's trapping that regular surplus, whether it be weekly, fortnightly, or monthly as part of that particular story. Because if we don't, we're going to get into a trap of overspending, which is usually scattered, but we call it unconscious, right? So in a lot of cases where the overspending happens is in that tap and go, right? Is in can't see it, so I'm just sort of, and then we don't have any bill shock because we're not necessarily monitoring as part of that. There is some reckless spending. I don't want to get into too much of that tonight. The reckless spending is a story potentially around, where I'm at emotionally in my life and why some of the spending that I'm doing is helping me move through some difficult moments in my life. So we're going to park that. We want to focus on making sure we get organized as part of that story, because if there is some reckless spending going on in there, we would encourage you to potentially seek out why those things are happening. And if you can fix those, then you will start to sharpen up, some of that surplus that you're trapping. Then we're going to move on to obviously the real issue here. So if it is overspending, that's the opportunity cost. So what we're saying is there's a trade-off when you are overspending. And so if you don't understand that, you're going to miss the whole message here. And we're trying to sort of say, try and take the emotion out of it where you can and have some rational spending versus irrational spending. But if you've got a plan in terms of how you're set up, then usually your rational brain will start to kick in after the emotional brain has its first impulse to say, oh, that'd be great. I'd like to have that. And then before I switch over to Evan's wrap up of this, money saved. I think it's important that people understand this and the fact that it rewards you or pays you multiple times over. So let me give you a couple of simple examples. I go off with my exertion. I give away my time through exertion, which is work, and I get a reward for that in the form of income. Now, if I then spend that income, it's paid me once. But if I put that income into a savings account or a term deposit, then it's actually giving me and earning me some interest. Or if I park it in my offset, if I've got a home loan, then it's also saving me on my debt interest. So it's paid me multiple times then over. Now, if I can also potentially put that into an investment that's also accumulating, then it may pay me multiple times over in the passive income that I earn or in the capital appreciation that I get as part of that. So it really is that important, Evan, isn't it, in terms of if we spend less than we earn, then we're going to be in trouble. But if we also don't think about what we're going to do with that allocated money, we're going to find ourselves in a difficult situation.
We are. So I want to take that multiple times over even further. There has been very recent research that you can show. I mean, it's been going on for eons, that if you look at an investment that is happening now, so whether it is your offset account, whether it's your term deposit, whether it's an investment, whatever multiple it is, over 7 years, it tends to basically be about double what you would have done if you hadn't have done anything at all. So that's why they say if your money can work for you while you sleep, that's the multiple times over.
Yep.
If your work is passively working for you, which is, I hate that word because it's actually not passive. It is actively moving
Yes.
you forward in your financial outcomes.
The context there is it's not trading,
Correct.
which it's just letting your investments.
That's our nuffy word.
Yeah.
That's our nuffy word. But for you guys, it's actively getting you ahead in the life cycle that Ben and I have gone through over the last 5 minutes. And that's the big key takeaway.
Yeah, I think we summarize this best by saying if you can't manage, then you effectively can't optimize what you can't see. So tonight's presentation and teachings are about explaining how you can work out what those numbers look like off the back of the data, and then start to give you a really simple template in terms of how you can control and manage your money. Because, if we're not moving the dial on the behavior here, then we're not moving towards our most important goals. So we might survive and we might be solvent with our money management, but the most important thing is really that trapped surplus is about allocating some of that money to those most important goals. That could be buying your first home, that could be starting your family, that could be building out your investment portfolio as part of that. So it's really what matters the most. And from your point of view, that's why I see the surplus. Yeah.
Yeah. And so my takeaway, did you hear what Ben said there? It's not necessarily something hugely physical, right? So your surplus gives you options. It gives you the ability to see the family in the future, to see the loved ones in the future. It is as simple as that, right? It is not just about going, I want to have 5 investment properties, although we will happily tell you about that.
Not 5, but anyway.
But yes, I know. But what we are trying to say here is that it's the old golf balls in the jar experiment, which is that your golf balls are the big life goals. They are your big future goals. And
without rocks in the jar, the big rocks in the jar. Yeah.
You can put the sand, which is all the small little stuff around it, and it fits in it. But those golf balls inside it, your rocks in it, they're the ones that matter to you more than anything. And so that's why you need to optimize what your goals are to allow you to manage those goals and achieve them with the surpluses that you can start accumulating. And it doesn't have to have been yesterday. It's from today forward, which is why we're doing the surplus challenge of 2026.
Well said. So let's talk about the old way, or the way in which some people are doing this. And we wanted to bring in a few stats in terms of what we've seen. And we've been on this journey in terms of teaching people that budgets don't technically work, or the traditional budget doesn't. And so here's some stats that we've pulled from a couple of bits of research. So Australians who say they will create a budget, around 53% of Australians say, based on a Savvy survey, that they'll attempt to create a budget. Australians who follow a weekly budget, 45%, and that's data from Budget Direct survey that they did. Australians who find budgeting difficult, I should say, and this is over a monthly period, 73% are challenged by that. If you look at the Employment Hero research. And then obviously from our big CommBank, Australians' confidence in managing financial goals, 52 to 55%. But that's, we think that's actually, we think it overs, because I think the question there is the confidence piece in terms of why that's overs, because I think they're sort of saying we're all really confident, but there's a lot of people that aren't confident, and I'm not sure there was a section inside that survey which they sort of said somewhat confident, versus confident.
I would even go confident versus actual. How many people are confident at managing their financial goals versus actually doing it?
We know we know that it would be less than a third, and that's why we're passionate about making those trainings. So what is it about the old way? It's pretty simple. It's guesswork. Most budgets are static. their guesses. And usually what we find when we talked about that 20 to 30% shortfall in what they're actually spending is because they get a templated budget and they say, I roughly spend that in that, I spend that, and they don't have a full view of all of their transactions. So if they don't have a few, they forget about a lot of the spending that they do because there's no line of sight on it.
Yeah, and they're also finite. So a weekly budget
Yeah.
starts again. A monthly budget starts again.
Yeah.
So what you did last week goes into the
Yeah.
ether. And so therefore you may have actually done your weekly budget, stayed on track, and then your new weekly budget starts again. This week you go over, you forget last week.
Well, but they also there's a point coming up here about manual tracking about the fact that they don't even look at last year's before they set this year. So anyway, let's go banking apps. So the other problem with banking apps is that we know the vast majority of banking apps, vast majority of Australians have multiple banks and multiple credit cards. So they're tapping and going with different sources, and it's not being curated into one spot. And usually inside those banking apps, they definitely have introduced spending in terms of categorization, but they're usually got about 10 categories or maybe 15 max. So you're not getting a full view, and so that just means it doesn't work. So and that leads into that manual tracking that doesn't also stick because of the fact that okay, well I used that budget template last year, and then 3 months later I wasn't using it, but I'll try that one again, and so I've got no historical data. Well, I can tell you when you're running a business, we normally, as a grounding, I'm not saying that it's the finished product, but as a baseline, we start with what did we spend last year? And how do we look at that? And then basically, what are the changes we're going to make in terms of that spending item to work out whether we need to increase that or decrease that based on our needs? And that's exactly how a household should run. And so manually tracking doesn't usually stick as part of that. And that leads into that historical context. So if I don't have that old historical budgets, what's my baseline? What am I starting with as part of that particular story? And so I think that is a really important way in terms of how people should be thinking about their budgets, but it's also the reason why people fail with these types of budgeting approaches.
And the final part from me is that there's no hole to this.
Yeah.
Right. So they're all different places. There's banking apps, there's off-the-shelf budgeting things, there is manual stuff, and even like the diagram on the screen you see a guy here who's got 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 different places that they are tracking individual parts of their overall whole of their finances. So when I talk about it in my book, the way I've got kids, and you're about to find out why. The one thing that I can't stress more is that the old kid idea, how you eat an elephant, one bite at a time, right? But what you forget is you've still got to eat the whole elephant. So if you can see the whole elephant,
well, you know what you're up against.
You know what you're up against. And not just that, yes, it might make you feel really full because that's the kids' joke.
But it's going to be over a period
But
of time.
the flip side on the behavioral side, if you can see the elephant from a financial perspective.
Oh, yeah. Nice elephant.
It's a very nice elephant. That's my total wealth.
You want to eat it.
Well, that's my total wealth.
Yeah.
It's the size of an elephant. That's the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, who can relate to this? If you can relate to this, show your hands. I mean, ultimately, we all started in some way. Our knowledge, our skill, our expertise, it all started down low. So, yeah, raise your hands if you're having any sort of relevance with this. And also, just a reminder, keep your questions coming in the Q&A area of the platform as well, of the Zoom webinar. We will be able to have a look at that as well. So, yeah, it's really important. And that sort of sets us up for where we want to go, right? This is the smarter way. So the smarter way, and we're not going to spend too much time other than we want to get into the demo, right? But you got to use real data. You can't estimate. And the best baseline data to use is your recent historical data. So, i.e., use your 2025 spending to be able to do that. Because when you have that data, we're going to be able to get a more accurate baseline of which we can build on. The other thing that I know most people don't like doing, and that's why originally when we built the Money Smart system, it was 10 minutes a month because we didn't want to track every expenditure. But with bank feeds and digital data and CSV files and so forth, automation is a thing. It is coming strong. AI is coming strong. So as part of that, we know that we don't want to do the admin because we're too time poor. It's not fun work for a lot of us. Some people love it,
Hmm.
but for the vast majority of people don't like it. So automation instead of admin is what we are trying to do here. So speed to answer is going to be important. And I mentioned it earlier around the historical tracking. So again, let's measure 2025 results as part of that particular story because it's no different in terms of managing money from looking at past history and everything. And we can learn a lot from that as a baseline. And this is where the rubber hits the road. So the insights we get instead of the overwhelm, because again, in all of the behavioral research, the overwhelm deters me from, doing the hard work on myself to get to the outcome that I want to get to. So if we can make that really easy and simple, where you can get speed to insight, is a great way in terms of being able to get to a smarter way of setting up your surplus annual targets. We like to work on annual targets because that just sets a baseline and then it creates a discipline in terms of what you're trying to do over that period of time. And we think this is what the future of money management is going to look like.
Yeah, and we know it is. I mean, the data for the last
Yeah.
5 to 10 years tells us that. We know that if you can automate your finances, take away choice,
Yep.
take away inaction, what I refer to as, basically behavioral inertia,
Yep. Inertia.
because it's just natural for human beings to do that. Don't beat yourself up on that either. So if a system can do it automatically for you, it
It
actually,
learns and then
yeah,
starts to do the work for you.
it does it for you, but
Pretty
it's
cool.
also going to develop your own habit behavior because you're going to see that the automation is taking X amount of dollars out of your everyday account, putting it into your offset or putting it into your investment
Yeah.
or building that automation. That's therefore getting back to Ben's point right at the start there, whereas your money's working for you. The passive investment, the active lifestyle that you're
Yeah.
creating for you, that is why this is the future.
And the future promise, if the future promise of this tool is that it's going to take you 10 minutes a month
Yeah.
to get those answers and to check in on how you're tracking okay and how can you improve, that's an effort that I think most people would be willing to give up. Now, I'm not trying to oversell that the initial setup takes a little bit longer than the 10 minutes, but once you're up and running, because the automations are all there, it's going to be a game changer. So this is now where we're getting to the exciting bit. Okay, I've been waiting for a year for this platform to deliver transactions and this type of power, and I'm super pleased to say that at the start of December we pulled all this together, and Alric, who has led this charge in terms of our product managing there. So thanks again for joining us, Al. Now you're going to take us through a demo for the next 20-25 minutes. We're going to interact a little bit there as part of that process, but I'm going to hand over to you now, Al. So thank you for sharing your screen, and let's just get started in terms of showing how simple yet powerful it is to basically organize your transactions into insights and then ultimately actionable insights off the back of that.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Ben and Evan. So, yeah, as I mentioned, I'm just going to take you through exactly how to set up that sort of surplus target for this coming year using your last year's financial year's transaction and that data there. So just to start off with, I'm just going to start with something that you're all familiar with, which is basically obviously your current platform. Now, I'm not going to go into this in detail, of course. I'm just going to give you a quick showcase here of some key numbers. So we've got Mary and John. They've got a surplus currently of $4,700, roughly $4,600. And you can see here they've got a pretty basic sort of layout of, basically a number of expense cards, and you can see here they've also got their bank accounts, a single loan and a credit card to sort of start off with. So we are starting from a base where we do have data in here, which is effectively going to be our 2025 budgets that we're now updating to set our 2026 targets. So without further ado, on the left here, what you'll see is under My Money, you'll see the transaction feed beta tab, which will bring you into this new area for transactions. Now, as you can see here, it is in beta, which means, obviously we'd like to have the smoothest experience possible for you. But as it is early release, if you do have any issues or if you do have any bugs, feel free to report them up the top here. I generally try and get on that together with the team as quickly as possible to get back to you with some of that feedback. Now, the first thing you want to do in this particular session here is obviously you've got a blank table to begin with. You can see there's a bit of a layout, a skeleton layout of what transactions might look like. What you want to do is you want to head over to the top right where you can hit import by CSV. Now, the first thing you'll see, obviously, is a little bit of an information area here around how to import your transactions. Now, to begin with, you do need to have something that we're calling a transaction source or a source account that's already been set up in the platform. What we mean by that essentially is where are the transactions coming from? So as an example, if I've got a credit card, that's effectively going to be the transaction source that I want to start entering in that information for. Similarly, if I've got a savings account or an offset account or a bank account, those sorts of things, that's what I want to be selecting as the source account. Over here, you've got the import method. Now, there is two options here. The import via CSV template is kind of like a little bit of a backup option. Now, you can choose to do this. If you select that option, you'll have the ability to download that CSV template over here, and then, loading your information and then loaded it from here. So the reality is you shouldn't need to do that. Smart Import is more than capable of taking care of it, but if you do run into any issues, that's always worth a try as well. So the first thing I'm going to recommend doing is when you get in here, don't start with loading in all 12 months of your transactions, because as you know, if you've got 10,000 transactions in that 12 months time, you're probably going to get overwhelmed at the initial outset of loading in these transactions and what this platform means for you when it in terms of setting it up. So the first thing I'd recommend doing is just choosing a single month. December is probably the best bet. Obviously, I've got June here just as for the sake of the demo, but December being the last month and the most fresh in your mind means you know exactly where things are going to go. After you've set up, after you've done a little bit of that setup, which I'll start doing from here, you can start to work your way backwards a couple months at a time, which would basically mean that you've already got the automation rules set up from your first few months of transactions, and now that you've got those set up, the future 6 or 8 months or whatever it is from there that you load in will be a lot smoother. Now, first things first, obviously what I've done is I've gone ahead and hit import on those particular transactions, or process file rather. The first thing that you want to see here is if you don't see that progress bar moving, if it's stuck on analyzing CSV in terms of that little loading bar, what you want to do is you just want to do a quick refresh of the page. So sometimes this page does seem to get stuck at the moment because it is in beta. So if you just do a quick Control-Shift-R on your keyboard, or if you're on Mac, it's Command-Shift-R, that'll just refresh the page and you should be able to re-upload that straight away. So the reality is this upload should take no more than 5 minutes. As you can see here, I've done 200 transactions and it's taken just a couple of seconds. So what you can see over here is just a quick preview of the CSV files that are going to be uploaded. So none of this data has actually been ingested just yet. So if you do see any glaring issues or something that's not quite right, not where you want it, immediately, you can actually cancel out of this, double check your CSV file, and then re-upload it again later. But for me, that's all looking well and good. So I'll go ahead and hit import on that. So you can see there's now a new loading bar that's just come through. And you can see there with the loading symbol there, Opti and Moorr are now starting to process my transactions. Now you can see here that it's actually saying that it's processing my transaction suggestions. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time in here. Now this section over here is the very first step towards the automation that Opti is going to be using, which is basically a lot of AI and smarts to help categorize your transactions. So the way the transaction system inside Moorr works is that it's based on a set of rules. So what we're calling Opti AI rules, and we'll go into other various different types of rules later as well. But what you can see is effectively what Opti has done is it's basically gone ahead and found a whole bunch of those transactions. And it's basically said, out of the 200 transactions that I've found a number of transactions that live in, as an example, so transactions from Medibank and from the merchant called MLC. And if I expand on that, I can see that there's actually 2 transactions from MLC, which, from this particular transaction from earlier, which could be related to life insurance. As I go down a little further, I'll just expand on all of these. You can see there's digital subscriptions over there, other household expenses for things like Amazon, Bunnings, that sort of thing, electricity, internet, telephone, and you can see there's a weird one here for rent, which I know for a fact that this person doesn't actually rent. So the first things first is, as you're scanning through this list, which I recommend you do really quickly, what it's basically telling you is that in the future, every time a transaction comes in where Opti has identified that the merchant is Medibank, MLC, Amazon Prime, Netflix, it's going to put those particular transactions and allocate them against this particular expense card. Now, in this particular case, you can see there's $9.50 here. I know for a fact that whatever this is not rent, so I can go ahead and remove that. That prevents that particular card from being created. And it doesn't actually delete it. It moves it down to the unallocated merchant for me to deal with later. So anything that's in this section down below, you don't have to allocate straight away. We'll come back for that later, but you can if you want to. As an example, I know Yui could have something to do with my other insurances. So if I go and type in the word insurance, it gives me a number of options for me to pick. Now, let's say Yui is house and contents insurance as an example. So that would have gone ahead and popped that up into my house and contents insurance area, which you can see now exists up above. All right, so I'm just going to do one last quick scan through here. I don't want to spend that much longer just showing you this area there. One other thing, let's see. Yeah, so Apple as an example, digital subs, that's looking good. Alcohol and tobacco. Yeah, that's all looking pretty good to me. Oh, here's one. Pekera. So Pekera is obviously like a sushi little hub that you can get food from. That's not in gambling and lotto. What I can do is I can actually go up to my dining out and takeaway and just type in the words Pekera. Click on that, and then that's just moved that up above. All right, so what I'm going to do from here is I'm just going to leave these to process later. I'm going to go ahead and hit confirm and process rule. Now, while that's loading, it's just going to take, just a little bit of time to do that. A key thing to note is that if you get presented with this particular screen, we'd recommend that you, obviously scan through those ones there. If it's recommended brand new cards that are obviously not relevant to your situation, take a moment to review those and remove them. As the AI improves over time, we'll have better recommendations for you. But for the time being, what you can see here is if I go straight to the allocated tab over in the top right, it's actually allocated 209 of those transactions basically instantaneously for me in that one CSV file. Now, the beauty of this is essentially if you now click on, let's say, one of these cards, let's say the education school fees card, I can now see there's a transactions tab, and then there's a number of different transactions in relation to education school fees. Now, obviously, I've only got one set of transactions in here. There's a budget of $3,000 per year. But you can see here, basically, for June, that's how much I've actually spent compared to the budgeted amount, which should have been $250 per month. Now, I can go into here and also, tweak this to view the insights over a particular period of time. And over the top here, I'll come into this a little bit later as well. You can also see an insight of average spend over the last year. We'll be using that shortly. But yes, coming back out into here, what you can basically see is the transactions and then the rules that were actually created by Opti to go ahead and basically put them in the right location. Now, let's say, for example, I've found something in here that's been allocated to a rule that I don't think is quite correct. Let's say, for example, PayPal, Google, maybe that was actually a subscription or something else. What I can do is I can actually go into here by clicking on one of these rules, if it's right then and there, or I can go into the automation manager. But for this particular example, I'll just go into the rule here, and I'll go ahead and just remove Google from that, so that next time in the future, when Google comes up, it's not going to come up into that particular area. Now, let's say that is an incorrect allocation. What do I do? There's a couple of things you can do. First things first, you can go ahead and reallocate that by using the bulk reallocate if there's multiple, or you can head over to the right over here, hit edit transaction, and then change that to the right allocation individually. So just quickly, coming over to the automation manager, this is effectively a list of all the rules that have just been created by Opti, which we'll be calling Opti automation rules. Now, if you click on the edit icon over here, you'll see the Opti automation rule header and then a list of information over here, which basically for Opti rules, it's always when there's a merchant that equals a particular value that's identified by the AI, it's going to go ahead and allocate that to a specific area. Now, a very important thing here, there is also the opportunity for you to customize your rules. So we don't necessarily want to do that inside the Opti automation rule. We want to do that outside of that. So by creating a brand new rule. So I'll come back into that shortly, but let's just go into the unallocated area so I can show you how to do that. So coming back into the unallocated area, you can see there's basically four different options over here, which I can basically allocate to rules, allocate individually if I'd like to. And what this will do is it'll basically move the Sims S motor transaction across to the allocated area. Alternatively, I can go ahead and let's say create a custom rule for the sake of this particular example. And yeah, let's go vehicle maintenance. And let's say rather than using merchant, I wanted to use something else. So let's say I wanted to use the description contains motor. And then I also want to specify that the source account must be from this specific bank account. So the reason I'm doing this is essentially, let's see, let's just go car maintenance over here. If you have particular examples where you have multiple cards under a particular item, so let's say, for example, right here, if I say vehicle maintenance, right? Maintenance. You can see immediately there's car maintenance and motorbike maintenance. There could be something specific that pulls a particular transaction towards car maintenance versus motorbike maintenance. And a key example for that could be if there's something in the transaction description that helps identify that and you want to track those independently. Let's say, for example, Ben, in your case, you've got your two sons who both do sport. If they're getting their transactions, or sorry, they're getting their sport through the same center, but they're being invoiced separately, you can actually use this conditional logic to basically put them into the right cards automatically from here on in. So I'm just going to pop that back into car maintenance. Now, what you'll see down the bottom here for custom rules is the option to review your transaction before processing the rule. Anytime you're setting up a brand new custom rule, I'd recommend just doing this first, just to see if it's going to work correctly.
Now, Al, can I jump in there and have a bit of a chat, in
Awesome.
terms of this particular story, right? Because one of the things we decided to do when we built the platform is these are called PFMs, basically personal financial management apps. In our case, we've got the money management app in addition to the property, in addition to the wealth, and in addition to the goals. So that's why we're a platform, which a lot of sort of the budgeting apps and all that just fall way short of what we're doing here. And the other thing they really fall short on is this concept of actually giving you access to the back end. So the reason why we consciously built it with all of this power is because we wanted to put you in control of your journey and your tailorization around how you wanted to organize that. That said, we still think you should start, with your training wheels on. And what I learned when I started building out all of my transactions in here. So Al, if you go to the transaction or the automation manager, and so what can potentially happen is if you create new automations or rules for lots of individual merchants, you're going to have a really big list. Now, the search feature in here is gold because it can take you straight to the right source. But what I've noticed in terms of our household spending, especially around takeaway and dining out, is that there's thousands of miniature merchants, right? And so I've decided that I try and keep the one rule, but I just keep adding all of those merchants in there. And that's part of, the system design that we're also building. And I've seen already one question in there around security and what gets known. And we'll answer that in the Q&A section. But to me, it's just one way in which you can keep it a little bit tidier in terms of how to do it. And that's not to say you can't create a lot more individual lists, because Al's just shown you a couple of examples where it's not just the merchant that is the trigger to allocate that to a card. There might be other rules. And, Al was also talking about in, my sons, Jack and Harry, I have recreational spending cards for both of them because I try and be a fair parent how much am I spending on
Even
Harry
if they don't tell you that.
how much am I spending on Jack? And I'm going to have evidence based on, this is how much, you're spending on your Jack and Harry. So I think that's why the power of those additional conditions and rules just separates our engine, the core engine that is transactions compared to our competitors here in Australia, but also I'd also take liberties and say in terms of what a lot of the other international apps like this do. Now, that to me is just one thing I just wanted to double click on because it really is incredibly powerful. And then once you've set them up to that point, as you ingest more and more months in, they just magically allocate, and that's where you get the power of that. So thanks for letting me have the liberties there, Al, to talk about, the design of the product.
Absolutely. No worries at all. Thank you for jumping in. All right, so just to continue where we left off with that particular one there, you can see it's now highlighted it in blue, and that's basically telling me that, this is the actual recommendation that I've chosen based on that rule. I can always just go ahead and hit confirm. By doing that, it's just going to go ahead and allocate that one transaction immediately. Of course, with the goal of automation, I want to do that automatically from here on in. And if I've got multiple transactions, rather than doing them one by one, I can just hit automatically run rule, and now that's processed that transaction for me. Cool. So there's now a couple of final transactions, 3 final transactions here. Having a look through here, obviously KFC for some reason hasn't been picked up. This one over here as well, and Happy Apple. Now, in probably 8 or 9 out of 10 cases, anything that you see here with an obscure name like a trust or something like that is most likely going to be dining out and takeaway food that you've ordered from another supplier, and you might have forgotten that that's what happened over there. So what I want to do over here is I basically want to go ahead into this JJL management over here. You can see that Opti popped up earlier and recommended rent to me. I don't want to do that necessarily. I'm going to go ahead and add that to an existing rule. I'm going to search dining out and takeaway food and just hit confirm on that. So now every time that one comes up, it'll go ahead and do that for me. Now for these two over here, Opti actually didn't appear because there's no actual merchants over here, as you can see. That's why I can't actually go ahead and allocate that to the dining out and takeaway rule based on the merchant. But what I can also do is I can go over here and I can go bulk allocate, or I can, as you saw earlier, set up that custom rule. In this case over here, I'm just going to go ahead and bulk allocate those ones here just for the sake of the example, and allocate those dining out and takeaway. Cool. So that's basically the crux of the transactions area. Now, just to show a little bit of the power of the automation there, you can see here 213 transactions have been allocated. I'm going to upload a significantly larger file just with a couple more months of data in there now using the exact same process as before. I just want to see if we can have a look at the effect of setting up those rules in advance, as well as, obviously importing a larger set of transactions for the next couple of months. As I mentioned to you earlier, it's good to start with 1 month and then work your way backwards once you're familiar with that system. Here, we're going to do 400 transactions next for the next couple of months. It's doing the same thing as before. It's going to basically process those particular transactions and also those rules that we've just set up as well. All right, again, as a reminder, if it's not quite loading for you at the CSV import stage, remember to do that Control-Shift-R refresh and then try re-uploading that file. There's always a service center as well. If you run into any issues, feel free to reach out. Myself and Lendl and a few others will be on the ball in terms of answering those questions. So you can see here, I'm just going to actually close out of this, so just so you can have a quick look at something. I'm going to go into the allocated area. I just want to see how many of those transactions actually got allocated. So that's now sitting at 449. So it's again allocated, over half of those transactions that have come through. Now heading back over to the allocated area, I'm just going to go into the Opti rule, repeat the same as before, having a quick look. And nothing really standing out to me so far, having a quick squeeze, but again, you'll be more in line with your own data in terms of where things should look. That one's probably not right. And you can see there's a couple down here. I'm just going to go ahead and allocate that one. I reckon that's probably dining out and takeaway food, or that's 185 bucks. But anyway, let's do that first. And then Suncorp Insurance, let's type in insurance again. And let's pop that over to health insurance. So confirm and process rules. So again, this particular area over here, I recommend spending a little bit of time in at the moment whilst the AI is improving in terms of its categorizations on the merchants, just to have a look, see if things are where they're meant to be, and then before things go well, things should come through and look quite similar to this, and you should process those transactions rather quickly. Now, the other thing you can also do, which I showed earlier, is if I come into this transaction area, one big flag for me would be any sort of transactions in here that look completely out of place. So groceries is probably going to be a little bit harder to sort of pick up on, but you can potentially find the ones that are, probably the highest cost and see if those actually make sense to you or not. And then if they're not looking correct, as I showed you earlier, you can use the drop-down feature to reallocate those. On the right here, you do also have access to this particular Opti rule, where you can also tweak some of those features, some of those merchants directly from within this particular area. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to quickly take you through this little tool up here that you can see here. This has just gone live as of today, so it's very fresh. What this is a snippet of your actual average spend over the last 12 months. So as a default, what you can see when you hover over this, it basically says average spend between 30th of January 2025 to 30th of January 2026. And you can see here $113.20 per week. Keep in mind, I've only got 3 months worth of data in here. So chances are, once I finish loading in the rest of this information, which I'm not going to do in this particular example, of course, but after you've done that, it will reflect your actual spending for this particular period of time. If you hover over this little copy button, what you can see, it says, copy this value to your budgeted spending, split by your current essential to discretionary ratios. What this essentially means is this figure over here, you can see there's a $200 in essential and $30 in discretionary. If I've increased or decreased my spend during the last 12 months and I want to use that as my new budgeted figure for whatever reason, I can go ahead and copy that and it will split that amount based on this specific ratio. So as an example, we'll just use easier number. If you had 60-40 as your ratio and then you had $200 per week, it would now split that to, basically times that by 2. So 120 and 80 would be your budgeted and discretionary spending. So first thing I want to do here is I just want to make sure I've got the right insight, which I can basically go in here and type in 2025. 31/12/2025. That'll give me the last year. Now, again, caveat obviously being I don't have all the transactions in here, but if I did, I could go ahead and hit copy, which I'm going to go ahead and do now. And what you can see is it's basically open up my historical log. So you can see the history of my budgets that have actually gone into the platform. And then what it's done is it's basically created a new entry for me here called the budgeted, essential and discretionary, but it's based on today's date. And that's created that budget based on this average spend figure. So that's one way you can quickly update your budget with the actual spend for the new financial year. And then what we can do is if I actually go into the cart area from here, I can actually see that, I can go through and basically hit copy. And up the top here, there's a nice handy left and right feature to move to the next card. I can review that one really quickly, update that budget that way as well, and then keep moving on from there.
So, well, basically what you're saying there is that as you've, reminding everyone, put your 12 months data in there 1 month at a time from say 1 July or from, from January last year if you want to do it in calendar years. And then that's going to give you a good sense in terms of what you're spending over the last 12-month period. And what I was just simply doing there is he's now then sort of saying as a starting point for each one of those expense cards, those financial cards, he's now then copying that across. And what's happening is that's then landing in his essential budget. So, and then the new transactions are the actuals against those numbers. So he's using that as a baseline as part of that story. So that's where the quick power comes in terms of being able to say, well, how do I roll over or reset my targets for the next 12 months?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Now I'm just going to flag this one particular card around education school fees because that's one we can use to help understand something else later down the track. But yeah, you can see here, obviously the average spend already has been a lot higher than what was originally budgeted for. Now, obviously you might be in a position where your kids are moving from primary school to high school as an example, or changing from Catholic to private or whatever it is, where your circumstances will change. So this is a good way to actually see that happening and getting the actual values directly in there. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that one over as well, just for the time being. And then I think that might actually be a good time to pass back over to you, Ben, for a quick recap.
Thanks, Al. So yes, we'll basically jump back in to our screen here because we've got a couple of what if scenarios that we want to quickly talk to before we also start to show you, okay, well, that's good. I know that now I've got some targets, but what sort of actionable insights can I do? Al mentioned there around the CSV imports. We've had a few queries around that. What should I do if it fails? We've got a couple of tips coming up, but I'll jump in here quickly to say, in some cases, if you're using Macs and other things, and when you're downloading that CSV, they're not downloading into a true .csv file. It needs to be a .csv file. That's going to be one way which will improve the ability for it to actually ingest. And then Al gave you the other one, which was the refresh, which is the Control Alt R. Is that right, Al? Is that the right sort of three button push?
Yep, Control Shift R, that's the one.
Now, our camera seems to be having a bit of a fit. Hopefully, that might settle down. If not, we might just unplug the camera for a second. So we're a bit frozen, and I'll just reset the camera coming in, and hopefully that will be okay. The second point, because we can move on, is I accidentally allocated transactions wrongly. So you've obviously shown that example. So if people want to go back and have a look at basically how that played itself out. That's also going to be possible as well to take a look at. And then finally, as we move through this, is can you show us how I manage my loan repayments? Because, that's obviously other data that's coming in through the source. So I've got two-way transactions going on there because if I've got the bank account that's making that payment, and then I've also got the bank account that's receiving that payment. So why don't you take over again and do a little demo when it comes to how I handle those things?
Fantastic. Yes. And I can also see I have a question here from one of the viewers as well, basically with this exact same question. So it's quite timely. So basically, what I want to do is go ahead and import a couple of files over here where we have basically what we're calling internal transfers. Now, internal transfers, for the sake of this, is essentially transfers that are between one account to another. Let's say, for example, I've got all my bank accounts listed out over here, including my loan accounts. That includes repaying a loan in full, as an example, or sending a repayment to a bank account, or even just transferring funds from one account to another. Let's say some people are transferring funds from their primary account to their living lifestyle and what have you. Those are particular ways that this also works. So I'm just going to go ahead and quickly, I'm just going to choose different accounts. Sorry, not that one there. I'm going to choose a joint bank account. And we've got a joint offset account over here. All right, so we might have run into that exact issue that I was mentioning earlier. So no, that's all good. It's come through. But if it stayed on there for a little bit longer, we would have just done that Control Shift R refresh to try that again. So I'm basically going to do things quite simply here, just for the sake of the example. I'm loading in a set of transactions which are actually internal transfers from within Westpac, as an example. Now, these haven't actually been identified as internal transfers. They just come through as blank transactions. That will happen sometimes. Other times you'll get a set of green, green data that shows up on the page, which I'll kind of show you what happens when you pull through the other area, and then I'll kind of talk you through why that is the case. So what I'm doing here is I'm basically uploading a set of transactions where I'm transferring from my offset account to my loan account as a set of repayments. And I've also got a handful of interest repayments in here for my loan statement as well. Right, what you can see here is instantly you've just got a set of whole bunch of green, right? So what do I do with this? What does this mean? Now, what you can see over here is if I hit the match button, what that's going to basically initially tell me straight away is I now have an action called internal transfer select from matching transactions. There's a list over here which may have one or more or none, no transactions matching. And you can see here it basically says Moorr has identified possible corresponding transactions above. Selecting confirm match will instantly reconcile and allocate both transactions. So why we want to do this, and we need to keep in mind that we're coming from a perspective where we do intend to have open banking as in automatic bank feeds in here in the future. Part of that is going to be ensuring that internal transfers are not double counting your transactions in the sense that you're not double counting, your credit card repayments as an example, where you have already got all the different expense lines, and then you've got that one single repayment later down the track. And for the sake of repayments to loans as well, we will actually have some additional insights coming in the future around repayments and interest based on this feature too. So what you can see here is I'm going to go ahead and hit confirm, and that's gone ahead and allocated that one specific transaction. It's going to go ahead and do another one. And then if you had only one side of the transaction, so let's say, for example, I loaded only the loan side first, and it was showing in green with a grayed out something here called, let me just refer to this again, awaiting internal transfer awaiting match. That's basically saying that as a transaction alone needs the other reconciling transaction to basically complete. So for those ones there, what you want to do is you just want to make sure you load in the other side of the set of transactions just to make sure loading both in and you're completing that particular set of transactions. So there we go. That's all basically done.
Now that I want to double click on that point, Al, because that's yeah, that was a rookie mistake that I made when I first started playing with it as well. So if you're going to load month by month in, try and load in all the transactions from each of the different credit card accounts, bank accounts, and so forth that you hold. We did get one question here around how many accounts can it hold. Unlimited is, we'd encourage you to have hundreds of bank accounts. That would just be insane. But I know that obviously with the Barefoot Investor, all the different buckets that he talked about, yes, it can handle all those, but you've just got to load in all of those CSV files from both the income side and the transactional side, which is your check account or your savings account, but also the lending side where those repayments are going to. So thanks for that, Al.
No worries. I'm just going to quickly showcase one last thing, if you don't mind. I'm just going to jump in and quickly take one of these transactions. Just going to remove that so it doesn't affect me. So I've basically just taken out manta rays from the automation rule. Just going to see if this works. Set to unallocated. It still come through. Automation rule.
And we can see that Al's had a fair bit of experience with this, so he's obviously a little bit more proficient than some of us who are just starting out as part of that story. I mean, as obviously a co-builder and creator of this section of the platform, Al has a lot of knowledge in this area. So you will become more and more familiar with how all of these moving parts work. And as I said, once they're originally set up from a merchant point of view or the rules point of view, the magic just starts to happen and you get speed to value very, very quickly.
Yeah. Thank you. Now, what I wanted to do is obviously like this one over here is meant to be in holidays, but I had a particular exam question which I think is well worth touching on right now before we even get to Q&A later is around split transactions. So the question was around what if I've got something from, let's say, Amazon, which basically has one number or one transaction, which can be in multiple different places at once. So it could be, let's say, $2,300 that I've just spent on Amazon. Let's just say this is Amazon for the sake of example. $1,000 of that has gone into, let's say, a new coffee machine. $500 has gone into, a new vacuum cleaner or something like that. What I can actually do is I can actually go ahead and do a manual allocation for that specific one, and then do a split to, let's say, $1,000 here. Let's say we got household maintenance or other household expenses. Let's just do that for now. Let's do another $500. Let's see, what do we got here? Household furnishings. And what's left? We got $805.20. Whoops. And yeah, let's just chuck that towards just anything here, really. Let's just go medical healthcare. Why not? Cool. So what that's going to do is it's actually going to go ahead and split that one transaction amongst all three of them. So where's that manta rays one over here? You can see that split amongst all three. So if I go into the other household spending and view that particular transaction, you see that's only got the $1,000 there. Let's just move down because it's on a different timeline. Let's just use the search function. There you go. That's the $1,000 relating to that one single transaction. Now, if I do hit edit transaction, I can still see all the data here. I can still see the source transaction over there. And that's how I can potentially split that allocation amongst multiple different cards for one transaction. Now, of course, with things like Amazon, I know James in our team obviously has a way where he basically puts all Amazon ones towards other household expenses. Some people will do that. That's completely up to you in terms of your system. This is a way where you can actually you can split those particular transactions for expense, which has multiple places to go. Cool. And that's back over to you, Ben.
Very good, Al. Very good indeed. So thank you for that. So some scenarios there. So let's just quickly recap. I'm conscious of time. There's so much gold in here, but let's just quickly work through that. Through your CSV imports, and if you're not familiar with how to import a CSV, what we've done at moorr.com.au/transaction feeds is we have a link to all of the major banks, not just the big four, but lots of major banks there that links to their website, which shows you how to extract or download a CSV file from that banking environment. So step number one. Step number two, what have you just seen? We've been able to automate through AI, looking at the merchant. Okay, so it's not looking at you particularly, it's looking at the merchant and other means in terms of, we're using anonymized data to be able to do that, to start setting some of those rules up. You've then set some of your own rules up. And again, from an anonymized point of view, we can see patterns that are appearing in regards to what's happening there. And then finally, you can see the tidy ups that you might need to do when it comes to that. Now, here's another little bonus point, right? Moorr is on mobile, right? So when you're in the platform, okay, and you have a bit of downtime, maybe on the train, plane, or airport or whatever, you can actually do some of those allocations of some of those manual transactions. So all of the rule system is built into the mobile, but you can't do the CSV extraction through mobile. So you can only do that. We're obviously waiting for bank feeds for the mobile area, but our mission was to always make transactions and money management on the go, and all of your other property and stuff potentially through the web app as part of that story. Finally, what was step number three that we were talking before about, and that is just review and tweak as part of that. And I think that's a good area, Al, where you can potentially just come on and show, okay, once I've done all that exercise, show me how I can have a quick view through my bulk editing view, and then show me where I get my answers in regards to my targeted surplus, how all of that's been calculated.
Perfect. All right. So now that we've just loaded in a couple of those transactions, let's have a look at firstly, just really quick one number down the bottom here, surplus. Now you can see that's actually come down, obviously not where we really want it to be, but that could be the reality because we have changed our situation for Mary and John. That's the first thing you can do, just to have a quick squeeze. And the next part over here is if you head over to the cards area in the top right, you'll see the little edit icon. You've got the bulk edit over here. It's very much worthwhile just running your eyes down here just to make sure things are looking, kind of where you want them to be, or they are the way they're meant to be. Just a quick sense check, really. And you've also got the very total down the bottom here of all your essential and discretionary spending on a monthly and yearly basis that you can also refer to quickly. We are going to be improving on this in the near future as well, just to start showing your actual data next to this. So that is coming, and that will be obviously quite handy for reviewing this data in the future.
Beautiful. Well said. Let's now jump back in to the presentation and talk about some of the tips. So let's recap the transaction tips that we were talking before about. So my financials is an area in terms of where we want you to start building your cards. And I would say use the default cards to start with. The second point off the back of that is in response to the CSV imports. If it's hanging, do that refresh that we just talked about earlier. If it's not a CSV or a .csv file, then it's not going to load at all. I learned that when I was showing a friend and he was on a Mac and we couldn't get it to load in terms of what that particular story looked like. In terms of the AI, do it once the Opti AI has done its initial run and its initial allocation, do that quick check that Al just took you through. And then ultimately, in terms of tip number 4 is the internal transfers. They're really powerful. And we've had one question in there around, wouldn't I just ignore those internal transfers? not if they're loan repayments, because we want to be tracking the loan repayments going down. So that's money. Yes, it's moving from maybe an offset account or a transactional account and it's paying down a loan. So we want to be able to show you your wealth position at any time, and that allows us to do that. So we don't want you ignoring some of those internal transfers when it comes to paying debt down. Fifth tip is with the card, the average spend is a great starting point. We talked about we're going to teach you how to trap your surplus in 26. We start with your 25 data. And so getting all that data loaded in and then clicking that average spend to carry across is going to set you up for the next 12 months in terms of looking at that annual figure. And then in regards to, this was one of the other questions that we saw there. Can I just start again? And the answer to that is a couple of things. Yes, you can bulk delete all transactions and start again if you want to, but it's also smart enough that if you did ignore or delete some of those transactions in terms of internal transfers, and you want to reload them again, but you don't want to manually sort of set up the CSV file to come in, the tool has been built by our amazing team to pick up duplicate transactions. And so it'll skip through those duplicates, get a little warning and said, do you want to skip all of those duplicate transactions that we see in there? And so that can also be the case. So if you want to reset and go again, you can do that. And there's ways in which you can get all that sort of stuff underway. Now, we promised you we're not going to go deep into this next section. It's going to be around a 5-minute, just quick fly through, but it's the actionable insights off the back. All right, well, you give me an insight. And so, okay, now am I tracking okay and how can I improve? So I'm going to hand back to Al, and he's just going to take us through a couple of the other very powerful tools that we've built into the money area or the money pillar of Moorr called Money Stretch and Money Fit. So over to you again, Al.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ben. All right, so obviously, if you've been in Moorr for a while, you know that the Money Fit area does exist. Or if you don't, welcome to the Money Fit area. Now, this is a great way to see how you and your specific circumstances for your household marry up to those in your specific demographic. So, as an example, you can compare to various age groups. For this one here, it's all ages. This is where the income's sitting for the couple at the moment. Over here, you can also do, various other comparisons for expenses. Are you spending more than other people? This can be a good one here if you're actually trying to understand, as an example, what the average spend, on the platform is around things like groceries or schools or whatever it is. It can give you a little bit of insight into what that is. Obviously, these guys don't have any spending on childcare fees at the moment, but assuming that loads through, then that'll come through. I'm just going to move forwards while that's doing that. You can see here annual surplus cash flow over here. It's somewhere kind of in the middle of that particular band there. And then finally, obviously, your net worth from here.
And you can see in that histogram the number of people that you're being compared against. So in that particular case down the bottom, you'll see, so the sample sizes are quite large there in terms of 27,000 different households in terms of where your spending sits. So if you're looking for a peer assessment in terms of you and your household in terms of others, and of course, as Al said, you can pick your household composition and pick your state, which will refine that because some states are more expensive than others to live in.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ben. Now I'm just going to come over to the Money Stretch tool, which is the next tab across over here. Now, basically what this does is it just simulates your surplus over the next sort of 36 months or 37 months. Yeah, 36 months to basically see what the cash flow is going to be like in the near future. So as you can see here, I've got the data in here from, 3,656 per month. So what you can do is, before you do your changes to your budget, what you can do is you can take a quick snapshot of this, and then once you've got the new data in, if you hit import live data, that'll present to you your new figure. So obviously I've just been in here earlier to create that live position, but if I've gone through here and then I've updated, I'm just going to go ahead and update this one for the sake of an example. That's now $20. I know that's reduced by $1,000 per year, so maybe a couple less than $100. If I import that live data, you can see that's just shifted ever so slightly upwards for what that's going to look like. So you can start to see a little bit of the effect of what those changes are going to be meaning for you. So obviously, in this particular case, started off 4,600. Now it's down 1,000. So that means the original one would have been a little bit higher, and that would have popped down a little bit. So might be something worth taking a quick snapshot of taking a quick screenshot of or a photo of, and then referring to shortly afterwards.
That's a really powerful tool, Al, and I can't underestimate that. In terms of the positive feedback I get about people sort of saying, well, what if we're starting a family and adjusting for that, or resetting that and calibrating some of those changes. So let's quickly run through some of those actionable insights that we've learnt about, as part of this. So the tip is looking at the bulk edit, do a sensitivity check on that to see whether they feel right, and roughly what you hope to be spending in the next 12 months. So if you need to adjust for those, that's going to be an important story. In terms of the home dashboard, we're looking at obviously the annual surplus that's also been revealed. And I also remind people to link those to your goals, right? At the end of the day, some goals have financial elements attached to it as well. So across the very top of the home dashboard, you've got that annual surplus target that was set off the back of those numbers. So that's a really important message there. And then finally, you've just seen a couple of little extra things around money fit for the sensitivity check on tracking for peers, and then modeling those cash flow scenarios, which is really about sort of, stress test that surplus in terms of, okay, what could alleviate that through some of those changes as well. So hopefully off the back of that, you're starting to see all of the power and control coming back into your hands in terms of how you manage your money. And that's what I want to just finish on before we get into Q&A. Just for those who are brand new to the platform and thinking about it, it's the most featured platform in the Australian market in terms of right across the board. It really is one platform for multiple solutions in terms of running your household. So setting your goals from a lifestyle point of view, running your money management through the tools that we've just shown you. There is so much in our property area around managing projections, cash flow, tax implications, and so forth. And then the wealth piece, which is bringing it all together, our wealth speeds, our investments, the performance, the historical tracking over time. All of those things are really, really powerful as part of that story. And what does it link back to? Well, it links back to this journey that we've been talking about in terms of, well, why do I do all this? Big rocks in the jar, golf balls in the jar, etc. Around that. It's about every dollar does have a job to do. So if we can trap that surplus, we can get underway in terms of that. Again, reminder, lots of information in the web app version, a lot more technical, a lot more real estate to do that. But the money on the go is our mission for the mobile. We are about to release shortly the property research reports that you can also get on mobile if you want to study particular performances on suburbs for houses or units. Those reports will be available on mobile very shortly. And we've got obviously bank feeds, which is the next big program we're working on. We're going to link documents, which will include receipts and all of those other things as part of that. There's just a lot of building going on. So if you love the platform today, the good news here is it's only going to get better from here as well, as part of the journey that we're taking you on. So that then now leads us into the Q&A area. And I think one of the most important questions that would have come up tonight is around security. So I want to address the security question first, because I think it's a really important one. I think it was Danielle or someone who came up with that question. Hopefully I can sort of quickly find it. But the question around that is, when we decided to build the transactions and the actuals versus budgeted, we were very meaningful about getting the best advice possible. And so we were fortunate to be able to sit down with the people at Macquarie Bank, their chief technology officers, and all of the security people that obviously build the bank, bank level security for banking. And now remembering our platform doesn't do any transactions, it doesn't do any payments and those types of things. It's just a data repository of your information, but that information is important. So we presented to them the vision of what we were trying to build. And so the design principle is that transactions live in what's referred to as a transaction vault. Now that transaction vault for data moving in is encrypted in flight and encrypted at rest. And no one can get into that vault. The only thing we can potentially do is get some information out of it if we need to, in terms of to help fix a problem or whatever. But effectively no one other than our CTO and our chief engineer who's working on this has access to that, and including Al, who's also our product manager, to fix some of those problems. So if we need to replicate a bug or something like that, we can obviously get permission from that. But no one else gets to see that data. That is effectively in a vault, separate to and secured with extra security layers compared to things like, budgeted numbers and those types of things, because we understand there might be some sensitivity around the data that you hold in there, whether that be, for any types of purchases that you make, etc. So we're very, very clear around how we built that and the levels of security that we put around that. So that's very hard, or in our view, almost impossible to penetrate that data vault in terms of what that particular thing looks like. So I think that's an important one to address. And as a user, if you then speak to an advisor or something like that, it's up to you to see who you give permissions to. What we do is, and in terms of there was one question there about AI, just quickly around how we learn it. So the AI is just looking at the merchant. It's not looking at the value or who's in control of it. It's aligning it to the merchant in terms of how we pull those things together. So again, there's no personal credited information that's going across that's going to potentially link to that. So very sensitive around, built on really strong security layers as part of that. So I think that's a great question. We got a question there, Evan?
Yeah, I think there's one straight to Al, which comes from Ronald, which is when will the features that we've gone through tonight, will they be out of beta?
When will they be out of beta? Look, that's a look. I'd like to say sooner rather than later. There's obviously a lot of work that we'd like to improve on. Number one is obviously the framework and making sure that you're having the very high success rate in terms of making sure that the imports are completing successfully. There's a bit of work that we want to make sure that we're doing correctly around repayments, around internal transfers to make sure that where applicable, we're actually still providing those particular insights. And then the automation manager area, I do want to touch on. It's obviously quite messy. It's very text heavy at the moment. There are improvements that we potentially might be looking at for that in the near future. But the bottom line is what we want to do is as kind of like a next step to this and sort of prior to getting out of beta is we do want to make sure that it's really well set up for when open banking does come in the near future. So that's kind of
And I mean, just a
saying.
quick show of hands, who's excited about what this feature can potentially bring? So if it's a feature, let us know in Q&A box some feedback about how excited you are about sort of doing that. I know there was another question in the chat around about allocations of essential versus discretionary. I know we're doing a piece of work on that in terms of using the historical percentages and using those to obviously then set the essential versus discretionary for the new numbers coming in play.
Yep. So that's I did a short demo of that earlier, but effectively the current split, like if let's say for example you've got a grocery card that's split $60 and $40 essential versus discretionary. If you want to choose to basically maybe I'll just take over really quickly if you don't mind, just
Yeah,
share that
sure.
screen
Go for it.
again. So yeah, let's say for example, I'll just use this one that I touched on earlier. You can see here that it was previously 1,200 and then $100 there. So there's a ratio there where there's a very small portion of discretionary spend. It's not going to look like this basically ever. It's just because I've only got a very small amount of data in here at the moment, which is why it's come through as such a small figure. But it'll effectively work out the ratio as a percentage of what's been allocated to essential versus discretionary in your last figure. Use that as the next figure going forwards. So if I want to go ahead and copy that, it will do that automatically. And if there's new cards that are being created, we do have a default set of allocations that we have in the back end around. Let's say, for example, if you've got holidays, we'll automatically put that towards discretionary if you don't have a holiday card. And then, if you're just hitting the copy button, that's just where it's going to put it. But of course, it's up to you if you want to set up your own budget in that particular sense.
Now, Al, there's people, and this one's from Ross, talking about cash. How are we managing and designing cash management when it comes to transactions? Because in Ross's example here, sometimes he buys clothes with cash or souvenirs with cash, etc.
Absolutely. So there's actually a couple of components to cash. The first one is when you've got basically withdrawals and a positive cash into a particular bank account. So you go to the ATM, you take $200 out, and that $200 you're now using on, whatever it is that you're spending that on, over a undisclosed period of time, because that could sit in your wallet for months, and never be spent. So what happens over there is, generally speaking, you've got something here. I'm just going to use, again, a random transaction here that'll actually be flagged as a cash transaction when it comes in, automatically. And what you'll see is the option to actually allocate to and from cash on hand. So over here, you see I've actually got no cash cards over here. What I'd recommend doing here, if you are using cash transaction, so it's not created here because it is quite optional. Not everyone uses, cash in that way. But if you do want to do that, go ahead and create a cash card. What you can see here is it's basically just gone ahead and created a blank card for me, an optional balance, current balance over here as well, so you don't have to track the actual balance of cash that you have on hand unless you want to. And then if you go ahead and hit allocate, what that will do is that will basically allocate that particular amount as cash that you now have on hand. So if I was to do that, and let's say for the sake of example, I've now got $10.50 that I've allocated as cash. So when I go ahead and actually spend that amount, so I can actually also go to the cash card over here. I can see a record of the transactions under here, including the amount that I've taken out from that particular account. So this effectively would have been like a withdrawal from an ATM, as an example, $10.
Yeah.
What I can do over here is I can go through and you can see here the source account is cash on hand. I can now track those cash transactions. So $5 went towards a coffee. I can go ahead and type that in and then allocate that one manually. Now, naturally, cash transactions are cash, so you do need to do those manually. You can do that directly from within the cash account over here, which might be a little bit more convenient for you, so you can see the layout of the land in terms of all your deposits and withdrawals from that particular account.
Oh, that's a quick little segue into one of the questions I've got around for, I think it's Ronald, in terms of that. Can I still do manual entries? Like, in other words, if I don't want to do the CSV, I might be running Money Smarts and I still want to keep setting up for that. Can I still use the Money Smart section of the platform to be able to do that?
Absolutely. And one thing I will note is obviously with transactions, it is coming from a slightly different approach to where Money Smarts came from in the past, where all you needed to do was track your, a few provision accounts over here in the jars. What you can see here, obviously, is it's populated a whole bunch of these based on the transaction data that I've actually imported in, which is fantastic. And that is where we do see it going. But if you do want to, not do any of that import stuff, you don't want to deal with rules, you can still go in here and manually update those individually. So you still have complete access to Money Smarts. That hasn't changed. Obviously, the UI looks a little bit different. And then it's basically just asking you for a source account there, but the rest of it is 100% exactly the same. You can continue using Money Smarts completely and 100% manually if you'd like to.
Can I give you a chance to have a quick drink of water, Al? Because there'll be more questions coming your way. This one's from Mel that just says, what's a good surplus target in percentage of your income? It does depend on where you are in your stage of life. So I just want to put that caveat on there. Like if I'm in university and what have you, and I've got a lot of fixed costs and so forth, you're not going to be saving a lot during that time. But as a general rule of thumb, what is good is 20%. What is okay is 10%. What is excellent to amazing is 30%. So if you get, I mean, that's when you are really sacrificing on living now and planning for tomorrow. So hopefully, those rough rules of thumb might help some people feel that they're tracking okay.
I want to jump in there though. We've got one from Gustav for you, Alec. How do you allocate big one-off expenses?
That's an interesting one. It depends on the one-off expense. So if you've got like a massive amount that you've put towards a car as an example, that's going to be a different case. If you don't not necessarily wanting to allocate that somewhere else, what you can do is you can actually choose. So if you click over here, you've got the items over here. Obviously, expenses are first because they're the main ones, but you've also got income. You've also got assets that you can allocate to. So what you've got here is, if you've got a vehicle card, which I don't have on this particular one here, you can actually choose to allocate that there. And then that way you can see that that transaction was used for purchasing this particular vehicle without having to affect necessarily your budget for that particular period.
Interesting. Okay. Now we've got time for maybe a couple more, but then we'll have to wrap up. Of course, all of the questions that we're getting, we've had Connor and Lendl who has been answering some of those questions for everyone who's put their questions through. So thank you, gentlemen, and also Ivis behind the scenes putting everything together. This one's a very common one. I use my personal credit card also for work credit. So in other words, I obviously buy those expenses and then I charge the company and I get the money back. Can you just, simplify it? I know I can give you a very simple thing. At the end of the day, that's been, if you bought it on the credit card, then effectively that's going to come up on your credit card statement. If you then go and put your work expense in and then you get a lump sum from the bank, that's going to hit your transactional bank account. So you're just going to marry up those two expenses is the simple way of doing it. But I didn't know whether you had an example there, Al, or
Yeah, I,
whether you
I
wanted to
do
question
have
it.
a brief example, and there's actually another question that I've got here from Michael, which is about cashbacks, which is a pretty similar thing, like that and refunds as well. So the
Yeah.
way you see it is, when you're tracking stuff like your medical expenses, or for the work expenses that you're buying first, and you're getting that slight discount because you're putting it on the same card and getting a rebate back from your the company and that sort of thing. You really want to be putting those into the exact same area for what they are. So let's say, for example, these are refunds over here. So Kmart, there was a refund of 47 bucks. I haven't put that as income. I've just put that straight into the clothing uh, item over here, sorry, clothing card. And that way I can actually see the net amount of the actual total insight for that specific card in that sequence. So similar thing if you've got Medicare cashbacks or refunds, those are effectively medical expenses that you've had, rebated. I wouldn't be treating those necessarily as income. I think the best way to do that is potentially just putting them directly under the medical expense themselves, so you can actually see the net effect of that particular income. Unless you're using that rebate to spend it on something else, that's another
Yeah,
story.
well,
But
yeah, that's right. If it's a true cash rebate for something else, because Jason Gray also, and if it is Jason that I know, g'day mate. Um, he had a question around, obviously, does the tally also include refunds? And yes, so the short answer to that is the team have thought really about everything when it comes to building this engine. So things like cashbacks, rebates, refunds, personally, they just net off in the ledger to the other side of the ledger. So, in terms of the annual calculations, they will take into account obviously all of the spending less the refunds or whatever, and then do the average after that calculation. So that hopefully answers that question for you, Jace, in terms of that particular thing. So again, please give us a feedback that you're loving the platform. There were some questions around investment properties and so forth. We will be picking up a lot of updates in terms of our investment property releases and so forth, because obviously now that you've got transactions, you can now link all of your expense cards against your investment properties and then track all of those. And that's how you're going to then be able to do your tax tracking and your tax reporting. We hope to have that sort of out by the middle of the year as part of that particular story as well. So there's definitely plenty going on when it comes to this. So thanks, Al, for taking us through that. We really appreciate, obviously, the feedback that we're getting and the love we're getting. This is, we talked about starting a cause and a mission. And so I just want to remind everyone throughout the course of 2026, this surplus challenge will continue. So even though we might be at the start of the year, if you're watching this now, go to moorr.com.au/surplus challenge, join the cause, join the crusade, interact with us. We'll be doing some more updates throughout the year. We'll also be, integrating it into the new podcast formats as well that we're planning to do in 2026. So it should be obviously a lot of fun in terms of helping people trap more surplus and aligning them to those goals. So thank you again, Elric, for all of you done. Thank you, Evan.
Thank you, Ben.
For your time. Hopefully everyone's got some terrific value out of tonight's presentation, and all we can say is go after it. All right, now's the time to act, because remember, knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it. And we thank you very much for your time and also your attendance for this presentation.